Hello again, welcome to another ITS UK discussion on the coronavirus crisis and how transport technology can help mitigate some of the worst aspects of it and how it can be part of the solutions for the future. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. You won't just find these discussions, but loads and loads of great content from the various forum meetings that we've had online over the last few weeks and will have in the future. We have three guests today who have used technology to really help transport find solutions in these difficult times. Let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have Dominic Paulo, who's a Senior Director at INRIX. We've got David Fowle, the founder of the parking solution Huzzah, and Ben Brown, Business Development Manager at Vaisala. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this discussion. I'm going to start with you, Dominic, because I used to work for a predecessor of the business that you now run in the UK, INRIX, and used very much the transport technology that was very embryonic at the time in the early 2000s. But the floating vehicle data you use for transport has really come into its own in the last few weeks, hasn't it? As you've been able to help out on what is going on as far as movement and how people have stayed at home and what transport has taken place when and how far people have been travelling. Your data has pretty much been invaluable.
Yes, it certainly helped a lot, Paul, in terms of our existing customers and potentially some new customers as well. Obviously, as you well know, INRIX is a DaaS and SaaS company, so data as a service, software as a service company, collecting disparate GPS data from a number of different sources, bringing that together and providing that back out primarily in real time for monitoring traffic conditions on road. As we well know, traffic has all but disappeared from the network, but part of the data sets we have is actually how many of those probe vehicles are actually going around. And we have a data set called trips data set, whereby we actually see the numbers of trips actually occurring on the network. And we've done quite a lot of work recently in terms of getting that in formats that is actually consumable by government entities to actually help them understand the movement of traffic on roads and how that's actually outturning day on day. And I'd be very happy to show you some of what I've been doing as part of this webinar, such that people can actually gain a better understanding. And it actually correlates very well with other fixed traffic equipment that's actually out there on the network. So yes, helping lots of people.
Excellent. Well, we will get to see that data in a moment, Dominic, but I suppose everyone that's watched the daily briefings from Downing Street has got used to the data on transport, which has been key to see the adherence to the restrictions, the stay-at-home message that we've had since mid-March. And I take it you've been able to really dig down further than just the headline figures and be able to see distance that people are travelling, the type of vehicles that are travelling around, all, I guess, still anonymized.
Indeed.
We'll come to that in a moment then, but first of all, let me pick up with Ben. Ben, you've used your solution from Vaisala, and now I've known Vaisala mainly as a weather company, but you've used a really useful solution to allow people on their own to still monitor the state of the road network, even though they would usually do this walking along in pairs because of social distancing rules. You came up with a new solution.
Yes, that's right. Well, we've been working with a technology called or known as computer vision for the last couple of years. And the primary application we've been developing is around using computer vision techniques to automatically analyze video footage. So we just collect video using a mobile phone in the windscreen of a vehicle. And we're analysing that footage and producing a road condition survey. So we've got lots of authorities up and down the country using and starting to embed this into their processes. And what we found was, as social distance measures were implemented, people were just reporting back in project meetings. Actually, they were using some of the other functionality within the system to help them conduct safety inspections when lone working. So using the tools that are available to drop pins on the map and take photographs and annotate, which is still largely a human process, the safety inspection process, but just having a video backup and that geospatial video to be able to then also share that inspection route with someone who might be working at home. So it's made us take a different a look and put a different priority really on how we've been developing the system.
And what have the clients been using it for? I take it, I suppose, something as simple as driving around, spotting where potholes are, and while the network is particularly quiet, as Dominic was saying, that's a good time to go out and do some maintenance.
Exactly, yes. I mean, it's really accelerated people's ability to do network-wide surveys, identify where they've got potholes, but also any other types of hazards. They can quickly take a snapshot and mark on the map. So there has unfortunately been an increase in incidents of fly tipping. There isn't an excuse, but the underlying cause may be the limited hours that some recycling centres were open at the start of the crisis. But again, being able to just drive around, hit that button, take a snapshot and have a pin on a map to be able to quickly identify where those locations are. Again, just some practical uses that people have really innovated themselves and found for the tools that we're already providing.
So technology has ticked off in two completely different ways. Let's pick up a third now by talking to David Fowle from Huzzar. Now, David, Huzzar is a startup company. You pretty much remortgaged your house to be able to get it set up and start to take it to market. Before we go any further, just explain what's special about it.
So Huzzar is pretty unique. We consider it the third generation of parking payment technology. With the first generation being cash and the second generation being one of these legacy pay-by-phone type apps. With Huzzar, it's a bit different. It works more like a subscription-based model where drivers sign up, they input their payment details and their car registration. Then whenever they go to a Huzzar-enabled car park, they don't do anything to pay for parking. Instead, we detect them entering and exiting via automatic number plate recognition cameras, and we simply bill them accordingly. And so I think one of the key benefits of that in this era that we find ourselves in is that it's the only truly touchless system on the market. So there's no pay and display, no potentially contaminated cash, and no points of congregation in the car park as drivers find a location code to input into a fiddly app, perhaps.
Makes a lot of sense. And I guess from what it sounds like, you've managed to integrate your solution with existing technology. So is that the way it works? Do I need to, if I were an authority with a car park, add in extra ANPR cameras, or if I've got them there anyway, will they integrate with your system?
So the majority of car parks that we operate in for councils don't currently have ANPR cameras, simply because councils to date have not been able to enforce that via ANPR, so there's less reason for them to have them. So we install them on the council's behalf, and therefore there's a myriad of additional benefits councils get, not least preparing for the day when they can enforce via ANPR. But in general, we integrate with existing technology. So for example, we integrate with all the major back-end parking management suppliers. So it's a fairly seamless process for councils and for private operators alike to make one of their car parks, or indeed all of their car parks, Huzzar enabled.
And what's the interest been like since we've had social distancing and since we've had the real awareness that actually when you're out and about, you want to touch things as little as possible? And also the fact that, of course, years and years and years of transport policy, at least in the short term, have been turned on their head by the fact that while we've been pushing public transport over the private car for what seems like forever and a day, suddenly we're now saying you need to use your private car to get from A to B. And then when you get there, obviously you need to park. So it becomes a very relevant solution. Is it one that people are picking up?
Well, exactly as you mentioned, many years ago we mortgaged the family home to start Huzzar. Luckily, we've had many investment rounds since then, but we actually coined the phrase zero-touch parking or zero-touch payments prior to COVID. And we think the relevance prior to COVID was primarily due to trying to get the message across that it's a very easy system, it's automatic, and all the benefits that that brings. However, as you point out, obviously COVID has given extra importance to the concept of zero touch. There have been a spate of articles, of course, highlighting the dangers of using potentially contaminated cash. And I think that cash is almost certainly going to decline, in general, but specifically in parking. But more than that, we've seen articles talking about the issues of any type of machine, a communal machine in a car park. But perhaps slightly less expectedly, there's been a lot of articles discussing the possibility of COVID remaining on mobile phones and the issues that we have to take our phone out and touch it with our hands, which might have been touching other things, and essentially leading to the spread of COVID via the mobile. So we think that all car parks should now be offering at least one method that doesn't require a phone and doesn't require cash or indeed the touching of any kind of communal machine. But of course, the touching of these elements aren't the only COVID risk. I think if you look at particularly for consumer, it's slightly different for freight, but if you look at consumer journeys undertaken by car, often the point of greatest congregation will be in the car park itself. And although many councils and indeed private operators will have looked at things like social distancing within the car park, you have a few natural choke points whereby in some ways social distancing seems almost impossible. So for example, if you try and have social distancing in a queue on a pay and display machine, there might not be the space. Social distancing might involve pedestrians having to stand in a road, which is clearly something that simply can't happen. It's simply not going to be safe. So we are suggesting that operators and councils implement a system that's not only cashless, but also touchless, and that will ensure that there's no need for people to congregate in a single area.
It sounds very much like sort of Uber of parking, by the fact that when you take an Uber, when your journey ends, you just open the door, you walk away, and then your phone buzzes, and there is the fare that's been taken. You get your receipt, you can add the tip, all those other things that you can do without even thinking about it once you set up your payment once. That sounds very similar to what you're pushing for people to use when it comes to parking.
Well, that's a fascinating comparison. I think that's very interesting, because it would be laughable if an Uber driver said to you, please tell me exactly how many miles you want me to drive for you. And if you go 5-10% over that mileage that you've guessed without really knowing, it's going to be an extra 60 quid. Like you wouldn't tolerate that in an Uber. But for too long, I think drivers have perhaps tolerated that in parking. I mean, because the technology wasn't there to provide an alternative to that. Now it is. I don't think that drivers over the next couple of years are going to tolerate having to guess how long they're going to park for. They're going to want to park, come back, and then have some form of pay on exit system, which I think really does need to be automatic. I don't think we can be asking drivers to manually complete their own parking sessions by sort of declaring that they finished parking and using an app or some form of payment machine. I think that is something of a bygone era, perhaps, that's happily, I would suggest, on its way out. Because, of course, the benefits, not only to the driver, but a pay on exit automatic system is beneficial to the council and to indeed private operators as well, I would suggest.
Okay, let's go back now to Dominic, because I want to catch up with what he promised to show us earlier, Dominic, which is exactly what the data has shown since we were told to stay at home, because it would be interesting to see again the steps in the data as we've started to ease things, and then we were told if you were going to work to drive rather than take public transport. Just intrigued to see what the numbers look like.
Okay, Paul, as previously mentioned, yes, we have this data called TRIPS data, where we understand the movements of those anonymized FED vehicles that we have. And what we did is we took data back last year, and we normalized some of that data and said, okay, well, this is what normal looks like. And then we started to apply that normal picture to actually the picture that we're seeing today. And when I say today, as of March 2020, and as you can hopefully see here for the United Kingdom, and I would note the other countries that we actually cover here listed, we can then break down by the vehicle type. So we know of those anonymous vehicles because most of our devices that are in with these vehicles are of the embedded nature, actually being physically attached to the vehicle, so we can actually determine which vehicle type they are. And then we have the particular areas within the United Kingdom. When I say Manchester, I don't mean the city of Manchester. I'll come on to another slide where I can, or another presentation where I can actually show you the detail in the city. This is basically the geographicals around Manchester, London, Leeds, Glasgow that make up the United Kingdom. So hopefully you can see here, we were trundling along fairly normally, and then we were advised to make no non-essential journeys, and we can see a sort of a dip here down to 80% of what was typically made. We trundled on for a week or so, and then basically lockdown was enacted, and you can see here that we actually fell to about 40% of what we would typically see on the network, and we kind of trundled along here in terms of our non-essential journeys. You can see the Easter period here where it fell even further, and we can see we carried on a small increase, if I could possibly say, and then as the lockdown started to get eased in terms of people being asked to return to work, obviously we can start to see small growths in that. And then I think most interestingly of late, and I think this covers the last 2 weekends, so this was the 23rd and the 24th of May, and we've got data for Saturday here, is we can actually see 2 spikes in the total numbers of trips covered. Obviously, people are still being strongly encouraged to work from home where possible, and we can see these trips actually increasing throughout the week. But at the weekends, we're now allowed to go to any particular places that we wish to see the scenery, or spend time with one other social group outside, and we can see spikes in the data here at the weekends, which provides interesting. Paul, any observations, Paul?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated to see the way the graph has fallen, and then as I spotted Easter. I thought, I wonder if that was it, and then we're slowly seeing it rise up again. What about? Hang on a second. I'm sorry, Luke. I'm going to have another edit here. I just need to remember what I was going to ask, because there was another. But what about trip distance? Have we seen whether or not there have been changes? Obviously, the days of me getting in the car and driving to Birmingham for an ITS UK forum meeting have paused. So what are the sort of distances travelled, and what have we learnt from that?
So it's interesting when you mention distances, Paul. So the distances, and let me just bring these up on this for you. And let me go to passenger vehicles here. As you can see, in terms of the passenger, the private car, let's say, you can see how dramatically those distances have actually changed as a whole overall during the period.
Yeah, that's and so. What's useful about this? What have your clients been actually doing with this data? Is this something that has been there to reassure government that people are sticking to the rules they've been given, or what other uses could they have had?
So I've got varying clients across the United Kingdom. One particular client uses the data extensively, much as is provided in the government updates, to understand how the measures of lockdown are actually affecting transport, and they take the data at the rawest level that I can furnish, and they actually do their own internal analysis upon that data. And I'm also supporting other UK clients looking at more direct user cases specifically around the movement of freight vehicles from certain points on the network. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to say who they are, but yes, my data is being used by clients to look at different elements of movement during this COVID period.
And how much extra work have your developers had to do to deliver this? Or is this just off the shelf and what you've been doing all the time and has just found a particularly niche use in this crisis?
So I'd like to say that as a DAS and a SaaS, this data was already available. My developers have created this window onto the data. So this Power BI, Microsoft Power BI view on the data, and this particular platform is updated daily with certain views upon the data just to illustrate the changes. And clients are taking the data at its rawest form, as I mentioned earlier, and are actually doing the analysis themselves. Obviously, as you can well appreciate, the data can answer many, many different queries. It's the queries that you want to place upon the data. We put these views together on the data as they provide what I'm going to call that initial window into the data, but there's many other things that can be answered by the data, as you alluded to, distance traveled within specific geographic regions. So we created another dashboard here, which I've got, which actually looks specifically within cities across the EU. And here you can see the numbers of trips that we've actually observed. So London seems to have a different trend to other cities within the UK. So if we looked at Manchester, we can actually see that the numbers of trips in London is actually less than that in Manchester, which almost makes sense in terms of those people in Manchester might not have such good public transport, rely more on the vehicle, other types of trips in terms of essential workers needing to go places and do things. So yes, there are many different views that can be taken upon the data to derive insights depending on the user case.
Let's pick up with Ben again. Ben, I'm interested, you've seen what Dominic's done with existing product. You've been working on your product and now it's found that extra special use during this crisis. Is this a sign that basically technology can do a lot more than sometimes it's designed for, or has many more benefits than you might expect? And what other things could we be looking at, and could other companies be looking at when it comes to the products they have and how they can be adapted to suit the moment?
Yes, I think one of the really interesting outcomes of the experiences I think we've all had over the last few months is how much it's accelerated the transformation towards digital technology that a lot of organizations have been able to make. I've been amazed really in terms of certainly a lot of local authorities and highways maintenance contractors that I've dealt with for a lot of years have really quickly mobilized large teams to start using digital platforms and digital technology. The particular application that they've been using of ours, using these annotation tools to support lone workers, I mean, it is becoming a bigger area of operations for us. The main focus is still on road assessments, but we've given any local authorities and maintenance contracting companies free access to the platform, just if they think it's going to be helpful for them during this period of social isolation. And to some extent, people are only now just starting to figure out ways that they can continue to use technology to support this social isolation measures over the longer term. There was a quote from Microsoft in the press this morning saying that they've actually seen 2 years worth of innovation and change in the space of the last 2 months. And I think, we've also witnessed that really. So I think that there will be some positive outcomes from all of this.
And of course, the beauty of all this is the flexibility. This isn't a one-off product that you use at the moment, and then it's gone when things get back to normal. You know, we're looking at social distancing, but you can pick up articles in newspapers where there was one quote where somebody said, well, you know, 2 meters, it could actually be 1.5, it could even be 1 meter, and soon enough it could be that we don't need to worry about social distancing at all. You know, in a year's time it might be a phrase that we'll look back on and go, oh yeah, I remember that. And so the key thing is that if you're making infrastructure changes, you make those for the long term, whereas the beauty with technology is it can be used and adapted far quicker and far more flexibly.
Yeah, that's right. I think we have seen people react very, very quickly. And I think what people are finding is actually something that they might not have considered previously, because it's such a big change to the established processes and ways of doing things. Once they actually take the plunge and actually try it, they realize that they can rely on the technology to work much more effectively going forwards. So in a way, it would seem crazy to go just dogmatically back to the old way of doing things, but I guess it's like everything, it's a case of keeping what works and taking the benefits, and then getting back to normality as much as we can as soon as possible.
And David, while we might soon be back in football grounds, sitting very close to people we don't know if the science suggests that that's okay to do, I think there will be certain things that will change. I'm not sure the next time I'll shake someone's hand, to be honest, because I think the concept of that touching will disappear a bit. And as a die-in-the-wool Brit, I'm delighted in the air kissing that you seem to have to do at every conference can stop as well. But that means, I guess, with things like parking, you're not going to see a return to people wanting to hold a ticket, wanting to carry cash, and wanting to touch buttons. So even though your solution is perfect for now, there's no reason why anyone would even want to go back once social distancing, you know, touch wood, has become a thing of the past.
Well, I think that's quite right. And I think that even if you look prior to COVID, for example, if you look at our penetration rates in some of the councils that already operate the Hussar system, Coventry City Council, for example, you look at our penetration rates, they're rising to around about 30% in under 6 months. I think that shows that there was already a demand for an automatic system, a fairer system, dare I say, a more technologically minded system. So I think that shows us that even were COVID to, and we all hope it will, to miraculously evaporate at some point, then I still think that the types of technological changes, perhaps that all the panelists today are making, are going to be the sort that will remain.
And Dominic, just to wrap up, we worked a million years ago on the travel information highway, talking about machine-to-machine distribution of traffic information, and it's taken a long time for people to actually really see the value in traffic data. You can go to events and they'll talk about data being the new oil, but it's kind of often lip service. People say these things and then don't actually deliver what they're talking about. This has been a real clear moment where traffic data, transport data, and actually being able to understand it and taking the raw data and turning it into information has been invaluable. We would have been in real trouble if we hadn't had the data that you and other people have been producing. So do you think this is going to see a long-term sea change in just how people take notice of and use the data that you and others provide?
I think it's a very interesting question you pose, Paul. I mean, I've been in this industry an awfully long time, as you've mentioned, and it's very interesting in the way in which the data is provided, commercialized, and a lot of the data prior to COVID was all about actually understanding things which weren't normal. Recurrent congestion was something that everybody was fundamentally used to and would unconsciously plan their journey based on, well, I know it takes this long because I know this particular road is congested for this period of time. And yes, if you looked at it, you know, over longer and longer periods, that actually congestion has got worse and worse and worse as the roads have become more and more saturated, but it wasn't an instantaneous thing like we've seen with COVID. Literally, congestion fell off the map. I think the most interesting thing that this data brings now is actually understanding what the new normal is actually going to look like, and looking at the trends, looking at how things are actually going to change and evolve, and understanding what that new normal actually means for us. Obviously, there's a tremendous push at the moment towards restarting the economy. People are being positively encouraged actually to use the car again, whilst we have periods of COVID whereby social distancing needs to be maintained. What does that actually mean for the transport network? And I think data like I can provide and others can provide in the market will provide absolutely key in understanding what that means. The last thing we want is heavily congested roads with lots and lots of people stranded in their cars. We need to keep Britain moving, as people have said in the past.
And I'm just going to ask the three of you now to give a very short bit of advice for people watching this, because our viewership of these discussions is fairly evenly spread between people working in local authorities and other ITS professionals, either consultants or suppliers. So what advice would you give both those groups of people when it comes to embracing technology and new ideas at the moment?
Well, I think that beyond, of course, encouraging everyone to embrace touchless payments in their car parks, I have to say that, I think I would encourage the council members that read your publication, who of course will have a particular interest and of course understanding of technology. I would suggest that all technology now needs to have a user, and of course in our field that means driver, focus. And I think what that means is that every solution implemented by the councils around parking, particularly parking payments, needs to follow similar lines that technology everywhere else have taken. And so I would encourage people working in parking for councils to consider that we are growing up with a generation that is used to things like Amazon Prime, Netflix subscriptions, and to ask whether things like pay by phone and pay by cash are really appropriate for this new generation that, as I say, are used to on-demand services.
Thanks, Paul, for the question. I'd like to keep it really simple. I think that this pandemic has actually shown us the power of data and what data can actually offer. And I would like to say that we should actually embrace data even more than we have done in the past, by looking at actually the insight that it's actually provided us. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity that it's opened up for a lot of our clients has been to embrace the technology and don't look at what you can get from the technology, not just taking the sort of standard offer maybe, but seeing what elements of the technology you can use to just help with and assist parts of your process. So it's maybe not going to replace an entire process, but you can take parts of the technology that's available to assist people who are out there working in difficult circumstances and just make their job a bit easier, a bit more efficient, a bit safer.
Gentlemen, it has been really fascinating. It's one of those webinars where I wish we weren't limited to half an hour and we could have talked for a lot longer, because there's been loads of really interesting stuff. So I will look to drag you back on in the weeks to come to discuss any more solutions, maybe get your clients on as well to talk about how they've found the benefits of the technological solutions we've been talking about. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching this latest discussion discussion from ITS UK as we keep trying to work our way through the coronavirus crisis and come up with solutions of where our industry can really help. And I think the last half hour has shown 3 really good examples of where technology can really deliver in this current crisis. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.